The relief was instantaneous. Several soldiers actually cheered. The helicopter circled once, confirming their position, then radioed that a ground rescue team was en route with their exact coordinates. Webb looked at Danny with something like awe. "You just saved us with a belt buckle." Danny fastened it back on, patting the worn brass. "Sometimes the old ways work because they're simple, reliable, and don't need batteries." The rescue team arrived within 40 minutes, bringing fresh water, medical supplies, and working communications equipment. A medic immediately attended to Rodriguez, starting in 4-drip and stabilizing his condition while arranging for helicopter medevac. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the training exercise commander, stepped out of the lead vehicle. Her expression was serious as she approached Webb and Danny. She'd been monitoring the situation since the solar flare knocked out communications. "Lieutenant Webb, report." Webb stood at attention, his face showing the weight of command decisions gone wrong. "Ma'am, at approximately 1,400 hours yesterday, we experienced total communications failure due to solar activity. I made the decision to maintain our projected course based on our last GPS readings." He paused, swallowing hard. "That decision was incorrect. Sergeant Callahan identified that we were off course and provided the correct navigation. When Specialist Rodriguez went down with heat exhaustion, Sergeant Callahan used a signal mirror to call for rescue." Mitchell turned to Danny. "A signal mirror, Sergeant?" Danny pulled his belt buckle forward slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Standard survival protocol. The sun was optimal for signaling." She almost smiled. "I received reports that someone was flashing Morse code SOS from your approximate location. Half my staff didn't even recognize what they were seeing." She looked back at Webb. "Lieutenant, we'll debrief extensively when we return to base. But let me be clear, your squad would have missed extraction by 7 miles. In a real combat scenario with actual hostile forces, that could have been catastrophic." Webb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Understood, ma'am." Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "However, you also made the right call when it mattered most. You listened to your NCO and adapted. That's what good officers do." She turned to address the entire squad. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Technology is a tool, not a crutch. When it fails, and it will fail, you need fundamentals. Land navigation, survival skills, improvisation, these aren't relics of the past. They're the foundation everything else is built on." The ride back to Fort Huachuca was quiet. Rodriguez was airlifted ahead for treatment. The remaining soldiers sat in the transport vehicles, processing what had happened. Thompson finally broke the silence, looking at Danny. "Sergeant Callahan, I owe you an apology. We all do. I was wrong to mock you." Danny shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, soldier. You learned something valuable and nobody got seriously hurt. That's a win in my book." Chun leaned forward. "Can you teach us? The old school stuff? Land NAV, signal methods, all of it?" Danny glanced at Webb, deferring to the officer's authority. Webb met his eyes with newfound respect. "I think that's an excellent idea, Corporal Chin." He looked at Danny. "Sergeant Callahan, I'm formally requesting you lead a monthly training session on traditional fieldcraft and survival skills. We've been so focused on integrating new technology that we've neglected the fundamentals." Gonzalez grinned. "Guess you're not a relic after all, Sergeant." Danny allowed himself a small smile. "I'm still old. But maybe old isn't the same as useless." The transport rumbled through the base gates as the Arizona sun began its descent. Inside, a squad of soldiers looked at their oldest member with completely different eyes than they had 24 hours before. 6 months later, Master Sergeant Daniel Callahan stood in front of a classroom filled with soldiers at Fort Huachuca. The room had changed since he'd first started teaching his fieldcraft course. What began as a single monthly session had evolved into a mandatory 2-week training module for all new personnel assigned to the base. On the whiteboard behind him were diagrams showing celestial navigation, terrain association techniques, and improvised signaling methods. But unlike the old days, his teachings now integrated with modern technology rather than replacing it. The Army had learned that balance was key. Lieutenant Webb, now a captain after an accelerated promotion, sat in the back observing. He'd become one of Danny's strongest advocates, even co-authoring a training manual titled Analog Backup, Essential Fieldcraft for the Digital Warrior, that was being distributed throughout the Army. In the front row sat Rodriguez, fully recovered and back on active duty. His ankle had healed completely, though he now carried a small survival kit that included a signal mirror, compass, and waterproof map set. Next to him were Chun, Thompson, and Gonzalez, all of whom had become certified fieldcraft instructors themselves. Danny held up his brass belt buckle, now something of a legend around the base. This saved 9 lives because it's simple, reliable, and doesn't need a power source. But I'm not here to tell you to throw away your GPS units and tablets. He gestured to the technology on the desk. I'm here to teach you that these devices are incredible force multipliers when they work, but you need to know what to do when they don't. A young private raised her hand. Sergeant, is it true they're naming the new training facility after you? Danny chuckled. The Callahan Survival Skills Center opens next month, though I tried to talk them out of it. Seemed a bit much for just doing my job. Webb stood up from the back. With respect, Sergeant, you did more than your job. You changed how this entire base thinks about preparedness and resilience. The Army needed that reminder. After class, Danny walked across the base toward the new facility. Construction was nearly complete. The building would house classrooms, a navigation course, survival scenario simulations, and a small museum dedicated to traditional military fieldcraft. He paused at a memorial stone being installed near the entrance. Engraved on it was a simple phrase, "Technology advances, fundamentals endure." His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. "Dad, saw your picture in Army Times. So proud of you. Mom would have loved seeing this." Danny smiled, touching the belt buckle his father had given him so many years ago. The same buckle his daughter would inherit someday, along with the lessons it represented. That evening, he sat in his office reviewing lesson plans for the next week's class. Through the window, he could see young soldiers practicing with compasses on the training grounds, their tablets and GPS units deliberately powered off. They called him a relic, and maybe he was. But relics have value precisely because they've survived the test of time. In a world obsessed with the newest technology, Danny had reminded an entire generation that some truths never become obsolete. Stay alert, stay prepared, and never forget the basics that keep you alive when everything else fails. The old sergeant leaned back in his chair, content. He'd served his country for 30 years, and now he was ensuring that service would continue through every soldier he taught. Every instinct he possessed screamed that those weren't ordinary criminals. The tactical precision, the positioning, the equipment, these were professionals. Military trained, possibly, or something closer to mercenary work. Marcus had connections from his younger days, friends who worked for agencies whose names he wasn't supposed to know. He'd heard stories over drinks about operations that happened in national parks, about things that occurred in the remote places where nobody was watching. He didn't know what this was, but he knew they couldn't go back down that trail. "Stay close," he murmured to Sophie, who was directly in front of him now. "And stay quiet, all of you." Behind them, the autumn forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere across the ravine, for armed figures were probably wondering why their bait had suddenly disappeared from the trail above them. Marcus's weathered binoculars, hanging around his neck, had just saved 5 lives. They had been moving back up the trail for 15 minutes when Marcus made a decision that would define the next few hours. He couldn't simply lead them back to the ranger station and hope nobody noticed their change in plans. If those figures were coordinated, and they absolutely were, they would have people stationed at multiple exits, multiple checkpoints. The moment they radioed in, the moment they appeared anywhere predictable, they'd be exposed. Marcus guided them off the main trail entirely, cutting through the dense forest perpendicular to their original path. The undergrowth was thick, the terrain unforgiving, but this was exactly where Marcus's 32 years of experience became the difference between theory and survival. He moved with absolute certainty, reading the land like others read books, finding the paths that didn't exist on any map. After another 20 minutes of hard hiking through increasingly difficult terrain, Marcus finally stopped them in a small clearing surrounded by a natural amphitheater of rock formations. It was defensible. It was remote. It was off any marked trail. "Sit," he said simply. They sat. All four of them looked at him with a mixture of confusion, fear, and trust. Sophie's face was pale. Riley's bravado had completely evaporated. James was breathing heavily but controlled. Dakota's jaw was clenched, processing. "What's happening?" Dakota asked, her voice steady despite her obvious anxiety. "We were about to walk into an ambush," Marcus said plainly. He saw no point in softening it. Armed individuals, professional positioning. They were waiting on that ridge for anyone coming down the main trail. "How could you possibly?" Riley started. "These?" Marcus lifted the binoculars, letting them catch the light. "Everyone laughs at them. Everyone thinks they're relics. But I've been looking through them for 15 years, and I know exactly what to look for in terrain that's trying to hide things. I saw 4 tactical positions, military-grade equipment, and a formation that screams ambush." James nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "If we'd gone down that trail, we wouldn't be having this conversation," Marcus finished. Sophie's hands were trembling. She gripped her knees to steady herself. "What do? We stay here for now. We're off the grid, off any expected path. I'm going to use the satellite communicator to contact headquarters, but I need to be careful about what I report and to whom. These kinds of operations, the coordination, the equipment, they don't happen randomly. Someone knew we'd be on that trail today. Someone at the ranger station knew our route. The implications settled over them like a cold fog. One of their own might have betrayed them. "Listen to me," Marcus continued, looking at each of them in turn. "What you're about to witness, what you're going to help me navigate, this is beyond routine. This is the kind of situation that tests everything you've been trained for and everything you haven't. I need you to trust me. Follow my lead without hesitation, and understand that your lives depend on staying sharp and staying focused." He paused, letting his words sink in. If you're watching this story right now, if you're on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next, I need you to hit that subscribe button, because Marcus's binoculars just saved these lives. But their real test is only beginning. Subscribe now, and don't miss what comes next. Marcus activated the satellite communicator with practiced precision. The device crackled to life and he keyed in a secure frequency, one that bypassed the normal ranger station channels entirely. This was a line that connected directly to the regional office, staffed by people he'd worked with for decades. People he trusted. "Base, this is Ranger 17. We have a code black situation. For armed individuals, tactical formation, ambush positioning on Ridge 7. We've diverted off-trail. Current location is secure but temporary." The response came back immediately, which told Marcus everything he needed to know. They'd been waiting for exactly this kind of call. "Copy 17. We're already tracking this. Intelligence came in 40 minutes ago about potential illegal activity in your sector. We were trying to reach you but couldn't get through on standard channels. Extracting your team now. Stay put. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't random criminals. This was coordinated surveillance, coordinated intelligence, coordinated interception. Someone had tipped off the regional office about activity in this exact location on this exact day. Someone had known. Marcus looked at his young rangers. They were watching him, waiting for reassurance he couldn't fully provide. "Not yet. Help is coming," he said. "But we need to understand something. Those 4 people on that ridge are part of something bigger. The fact that Regional already knew about this means there's been intelligence gathering happening for days, maybe weeks. Someone in our station knew about today's patrol route and didn't warn us. That's the real problem we're facing." "You mean someone wanted us to go down that trail?" Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. "I mean someone was willing to risk it," Marcus corrected. "Whether they wanted us there specifically or just didn't care if we were in the crossfire, that's the distinction we need to make." James stood up, understanding crystallizing on his face. "The only people who knew our exact route and timing were the rangers at the station and the dispatch team. That's maybe 8 people. 7 now," Dakota said quietly. "Martinez called in sick this morning. Last minute." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, that sensation of a puzzle piece falling into place. Martinez, new to the station, transferred in 6 months ago from a facility in Arizona. Quiet, competent, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of person you wouldn't notice until it was too late. Describe Martinez, Marcus commanded. They did. Military bearing. Unusually interested in patrol routes and ranger schedules. Never quite fitting in despite being friendly. All the hallmarks of someone embedded rather than employed. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the forest air above them. Not the standard ranger service helicopter. This was something military, something federal. The sound grew louder, closer, and within moments, tactical personnel were rappelling down into their clearing, moving with the same professional precision as the people on the ridge. "Ranger Marcus?" one of them asked, though it wasn't really a question. "That's me. We need to move. Now, your station is already being secured. We've got people moving in on those positions across the ravine. You and your team are being extracted as witnesses and protected persons." As they moved toward the helicopter, Marcus caught sight of movement across the ravine. Tactical teams converging on the ridge positions. The ambush had become the ambushed. And it was because an old ranger with weathered binoculars had looked at the world just long enough to see what others had missed. The helicopter descended through the clouds with the kind of mechanical precision that suggested this wasn't the first time this crew had extracted people from hostile territory. Marcus and his 4 rangers were secured into harnesses, lifted into the aircraft, and within seconds they were airborne, the forest floor shrinking beneath them. The next 6 hours were a blur of debriefing rooms, federal agents, and questions that seemed to circle back on themselves. They were taken to a secure facility outside Denver, a nondescript building that didn't appear on any map. Inside, everything was clinical and efficient. Coffee that tasted like it had been made in 1987. Fluorescent lights that hummed with the kind of frequency that made your teeth ache. And endless, methodical questioning. What Marcus learned over those 6 hours was that the operation on the ridge wasn't about him or his rangers at all. It was about something happening upstream, literally. There was a facility in the national forest, hidden in a location that appeared blank on official records. It had been constructed illegally, operated by a private military contractor working with someone inside the federal government. The ambush was designed to eliminate witnesses to something happening at that facility. Not necessarily hikers, just anyone who might wander into the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus's binoculars had accidentally revealed their security perimeter. By evening, the pieces had come together. Martinez had been embedded at the ranger station specifically to ensure that patrols didn't wander too close to the facility. When Marcus's route had been flagged as potentially problematic, Martinez had called in sick and alerted his handlers. The plan was simple. Let the hikers get close enough to trigger the ambush and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Tragic, but not suspicious. The federal agents were almost apologetic in their tone when they explained this to Marcus. Almost apologetic, but not quite. In their world, this was just another operation, another threat neutralized, another breach contained. "Your observation skills prevented a tragedy," the lead agent told him. "But more importantly, it helped us identify a significant national security breach. We'll need you and your team to sign some documentation about confidentiality. But after that, you're free to go back to your lives." "And Martinez?" Dakota asked. "What happens to him?" "That's not your concern," the agent replied, which was answer enough. Marcus sat in that debriefing room as the sun set outside windows he wasn't permitted to see through clearly, and he felt something shift inside him. 32 years of patrolling forests, training rangers, maintaining the illusion that the wilderness was a place separate from the world's complications. And then, in one moment, all of that had fractured. The forest wasn't a sanctuary. It was just another place where the world's darkness could hide. When they were finally released, it was near midnight. Marcus drove each of his rangers home personally. Riley was quiet, humbled. Sophie thanked him 3 times over. James shook his hand with genuine respect. Dakota simply nodded, understanding that some experiences changed you in ways words couldn't capture. When Marcus finally returned home to his small cabin on the outskirts of Boulder, he placed those weathered binoculars on his shelf, next to photographs of mountains he'd climbed and rangers he'd trained. For the first time in 15 years, he wasn't sure he'd pick them up again tomorrow. But he knew he would. Because in a world where darkness hid in remote places, someone had to be looking. 3 years later, Marcus stood at the same overlook where everything had changed, binoculars hanging around his neck just like they always had. The forest looked exactly the same endless expanse of pine, the same distant mountains, the same ribbon of river winding through the canyon. But Marcus knew that nothing was ever truly the same once you'd seen behind the curtain. The facility that had been hidden in the forest was gone now, dismantled piece by federal teams working through the night. The private military contractor had been dissolved, its executives scattered across various federal penitentiaries. The government official who'd authorized the whole operation had resigned quietly, which meant he'd probably been offered a deal that kept him out of prison but kept him quiet forever. Marcus had been offered things too. A promotion to a desk job in Denver. Early retirement with a substantial pension increase. Consulting contracts with agencies he wasn't supposed to acknowledge existed. He turned them all down. Instead, he'd done something that surprised everyone, including himself. He'd taken a leave of absence. For 18 months, Marcus had stepped back from the Ranger service entirely. He'd traveled, not to exotic destinations, but to quiet places. Small towns, rural communities, places where the world moved slowly and people still believed in the inherent goodness of strangers. He'd spent time rebuilding something inside himself that the ambush had fractured. Not trust exactly, but something closer to acceptance. The world had darkness in it. The wilderness had become its hiding place. And that was simply the world as it was. When he returned to the ranger station, everything had changed and nothing had changed. His desk was still there. His training materials were still there. But the station itself felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. Martinez was gone, of course. The investigation had been thorough, and every personnel file had been reviewed. The breach had been contained. Riley had quit the Ranger service and moved to California to become a rock climbing instructor. He sent Marcus a postcard every Christmas without fail. Sophie had been promoted and was now leading training programs for new Rangers. Her own training had accelerated by experience. James had stayed on, becoming Marcus's most trusted deputy. The one who understood without being told. Dakota had pursued a different path entirely, transferring to a federal intelligence agency, determined to understand the system from the inside. But it was the binoculars that had changed the most in a way. They'd become something more than equipment now. They'd become a symbol. Marcus had written up a training protocol called the Long View, teaching younger Rangers how to observe not just what was visible, but what was hidden. How to read terrain not just for beauty but for danger. How to trust instinct when it whispered that something wasn't right. The protocol was now taught at Ranger stations across 12 states. On this particular afternoon, 3 years after the ambush, Marcus had brought a new group of Rangers to this same overlook. 12 of them, fresh from the academy, standing where Riley, Sophie, James, and Dakota had stood 3 years ago. He lifted his binoculars to his eyes and swept across the ridge where the ambush had been positioned. Nothing but forest now. Nothing but peace. "What are you looking for?" one of the new recruits asked. Marcus lowered the binoculars and turned to face the group. "I'm looking for what most people miss. I'm looking for the world as it actually is, not as we hope it to be. And I'm looking for the moment when awareness becomes survival." He paused, letting his gaze settle on each of their faces. "And I'm teaching you to look too. Thank you so much for following Marcus's story from beginning to end. For staying with him through the ambush, the revelation, and the 3-year journey of healing and purpose. This is the kind of story that reminds us that sometimes the smallest details, a pair of weathered binoculars, a moment of intuition, a decision to trust your instincts, can change everything. If you loved this story, please like this video. Leave a comment telling me what moment hit you the hardest. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel because we have so many more stories coming. Stories of ordinary people in extraordinary situations, stories of survival, of redemption, of the hidden strength we all carry inside ourselves. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Marcus's story. and let me know in the comments what story you want me to bring to life next. Until then, keep your eyes open. Keep looking, because sometimes the most important things are the ones we almost miss. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.